One of the most crucial skills that you're going to need to build success, whether it's professional success or success in relationships in your personal life, is having emotional intelligence, what we refer to as emotional intelligence. The thing is, though, most people don't really fully understand what that is. They don't understand what emotional intelligence is. And I think we should define emotional intelligence and have an open conversation about what it is and why it matters. I think there's a lot of people walking around without addressing their emotional intelligence and thus struggling to achieve what they otherwise could achieve in all of those domains, personal, professional, whatever it is. So let's talk about it. Let's get into it. Let's help people to address what these issues are. I mean, as a psychotherapist, people come to me all the time and they think the problem is the way their wife or husband is behaving. They think the problem is that their kids don't listen, or they think the issue is something external of them. But the truth is, very often, the issue is them and their emotional intelligence. And I think we have to get to the core of it. We have to get to the root of it. We have to do things that will help address people's emotional intelligence. Because the good news is, even though there are some people who speculate that you're born with a certain level of emotional intelligence, I actually believe and have borne witness to in my therapy practice, people's emotional intelligence can change, meaning it can grow. You can do stuff to improve your emotional intelligence. So this week, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what your emotional intelligence is, how to build it, how to grow it, why it's important, why it matters, and we're going to start today. So welcome back to the aha moments, where every day I share the lessons I've learned in my work as a psychotherapist and in my life to inspire you to live your very best life. Of course, I'm your host, Elliott Connie. So first, let's define what it is. And emotional intelligence is the ability to understand, to be aware of, to regulate your own emotions and responses in the way that you interact with other people. It's also having the ability to be aware of the influence that your words, actions, and emotions have on other people. At its core, a very common word that people with high emotional intelligence will use to refer to themselves is self-aware. People who are really good in emotional intelligence, they have a tendency to be low conflict. Not necessarily that they're not conflict avoidant. Not necessarily these are not the kind of people that don't want to, I'm trying to think of the word, but they don't want to directly address another person. But these are the people who understand how to navigate certain conversations and certain relationships so that unconstructive conflict does not get in the way. This is an important skill. And think about it in this context. So there are a few people I follow on social media, I'm sure you guys have seen them too, where they have political conversations. There's one guy, his name is Dean, and he will walk up to someone who is a Donald Trump supporter, and he will say something like, would you ever support a candidate or a president who did these things? And the person will say, absolutely not. And they will say, what about a president who did these things? And he'll say, absolutely not. I'm thinking of a recent video where he said, the person he was interviewing said, if anybody ever did those things, he should be arrested and thrown in prison. And then Dean said, well, Donald Trump did those things. And the person said, prove it. Dean proved it. He pulled out a video of Donald Trump being interviewed on the Howard Stern show and saying some pretty vile things about women. And the person he was interviewing said, F you, and stormed off. That is someone demonstrating low emotional intelligence because he could not engage in a productive or a constructive conversation. He's not aware of these emotions, and he's not aware of how his words impact others or how other people's words impact him. He gets triggered in that particular example, and instead of listening to another opinion without being emotionally dysregulated, he heard the other person's opinion, it made him angry, cursed, and he stormed off. Now, I'm not saying that people with emotional intelligence are they change their minds because they've heard of a video or whatever. But what I am saying is they are capable of listening to someone express a counter opinion without being angry and avoidant. I'm also saying that person who can hear a counter opinion, people with a higher emotional intelligence, they tend to have the ability to take on new evidence and form new opinions. So that's just an example of what it is and why it matters, because you really struggle in personal relationships if you don't have this ability, because you can't engage in dialogue where other people have other opinions. Now, I just gave kind of a polarizing thing. Politics these days is polarizing, and I'm sure somebody's going to watch this, get pissed off at me, and I'll say it abruptly and bluntly. I don't care. But people do struggle when it's really tough. Like, you might have a best friend who thinks the greatest basketball player of all times is LeBron James, and you think it's Michael Jordan. You've got to have a way to regulate your emotions in these conversations and realize I don't have to get mad. I don't have to storm off. I don't have to lose my cool and forget who I am. So, how do you improve? Well, right now I'm going to ask you to do a very basic thing. Just check in with yourself. When you feel your emotions rising, ask yourself a very simple question. Does this person have the right to have the opinion that they have? Does their opinion cause me any harm? And what can I do to make sure that I can honor their ability to have an opinion while not allowing it to disrupt my emotional state? Because I'm a glutton for pain and torture, I'm going to use politics as an example today to make the point. Like, there's this phrase that says you can't manage what you don't understand. And I think people often misunderstand that for believing that they have to understand, like, information that is coming towards them. But that's actually not the key. That's not the key to developing strong and high quality emotional intelligence. We think, like, if someone gives us an opinion, we think that we have to understand that opinion. And how many times have you heard of people say, I don't understand why you would think that. I don't understand why you would believe that. I can't believe someone like you thinks that. Like, that's how we tend to think of those things when we think from the positionality of emotional intelligence. We think, like, what is this opinion and how do I make sense of it? But that's actually not the key to it. In fact, emotional intelligence starts with a very, very simple kind of understanding that makes that statement true. You cannot manage what you don't understand. And I'm going to break down today what exactly it is you have to understand that will help you manage your emotions better and more effectively. Here's what you absolutely need to understand. You need to understand you. You need to understand yourself. And you have to understand your positionality and where you fit in the context of whatever it is conversation you're having. So I will be, like, very honest with you and tell you I do not support the current president and what he is doing and the job he is doing. And quite frankly, some of the decisions and the way the MAGA community behaves makes no sense to me, and I don't understand it. So, Elliott, what does that have to do with emotional regulation? Well, I'm going to tell you. I do understand that part of the reasons I have the opinions that I have is because I grew up in America as an African American. My positioning in America has been as a minority, and that has given me a very particular lens with which to view the world. I went to high school just outside of Boston in a place called Franklin, Massachusetts. And a lot of people that I grew up with have grown up to be Trump supporters, and it surprised me. But when I take a step back and realize they live in New England, where it is not a diverse community, whereas it is not a diverse environment. They're not used to looking at the world through the lens of minority and how these things are impacted. So I have to understand how my positioning, and I have to understand my own sense of self that allows me to understand how they arrived where they arrived. Because my positionality and my sense of self is very different from theirs. We have completely different experiences based upon our completely different backgrounds. I think sometimes people don't understand that positioning matters and it informs how we do what we do. So am I glad they support Donald Trump? No. But do I understand how they arrived at the decisions that they did? Of course I do. Because they're not living their lives through the lens with which I'm living mine. And lens matters. It impacts things. I was having a conversation with somebody on Facebook, and one of those like Facebook arguments you get into, and I was saying how much I struggled while I was in high school, living in the environment that I was in. and someone commented, like, we're from the same place and you're describing it differently. And I wanted to scream, like, we're not from the same place. You're from this area of Massachusetts from your very white, privileged, affluent experience. And I might be from the same geographical area, but I don't have the same lived experiences, which qualitatively makes it different where I'm from and what I went through. So geographically, are we from the same place? Of course. But we're not from the same experience. Like, if I grew up in Los Angeles and the Kardashians grew up in Los Angeles, you would fully understand that we didn't grow up in the same Los Angeles. The Kardashians' lifestyle, access, and wealth gave them experiences that, quite frankly, I was not privy to. And I think we just have to start understanding that it's your perspective and owning your positioning that has to be understood. Understanding your sense of self is the key to managing your emotions and increasing your emotional intelligence. It's not about understanding what people are saying to you. It's about understanding who you are, your positionality, and your sense of self. So the only thing that you can do to practice this, I want you to think, who am I? And what in my history and experiences has informed my positioning? Now, I wish and I hope everybody watches this video. I would love for this video to get millions and millions of views. Not for any reason associated with me, not because I'll make money or any of that stuff, but the reason is because if we could remove anger from some of our political discourse and increase compassion and understanding, I think that would go a very, very long way to creating healing in our society, which I think we need more than ever. But instead, we have people really, really angry because they just don't understand, why does somebody hold the position that they hold? If we increase compassion, listening, and understanding, I think that would make a difference. So I'm just like everybody else. You know, when I have moments of emotional dysregulation, like when I have moments where I am not really following my emotional intelligence. And by the way, everyone is emotionally intelligent. Like, I truly believe that. Like, everyone has emotional intelligence. The question is, how many of us listen to what our emotional intelligence is telling us? Just like everyone has intelligence. Like, everyone has, like, we know what a good decision, right decision is. But how many times have you made a decision that you know isn't right? That you know this probably isn't the best thing for me to be doing, but you did it. So like everybody else, I have emotional intelligence, and like everybody else, I don't always listen to it. But when I can follow my emotional intelligence, especially in situations that are high stress, high conflict, high difficulty, it will always work out better for me. Unfortunately, I've had both. I've had situations where I kind of let my emotions get the better of me. And I've had circumstances and situations where I felt like I was in complete control of my emotions and I was in complete control of my ability to be regulated. And I want to share today on why it's so important that as much as you can, as often as you can, that you stay completely regulated. The number one thing I can say about your ability to be emotionally intelligent, it leads to what I think is one of the most important things ever, which is you being intentional in your actions. I've had lots of things happen to me. Like, I'll just use one example, or I'll use examples from the field of psychotherapy where I work. And I've told, if you've been following for a while, you know that I have work in the field of solution-focused brief therapy. I've been doing that for nearly 20 years now. And not all of it has been fun and amazing. Like, I've run into some pretty bigoted, horrible people in my journey. I've run into some pretty negative, kind of nasty people in my journey that wanted to oppress me, that wanted to judge me, that wanted to be racist towards me. Man, and that's hard. Like, that's really hard. Like, you want to rage and you want to lash out and you want to be angry, sometimes even violent. Like, it's a really difficult thing. But I knew if I respond emotionally to all of these triggers, if I respond emotionally to all of these people doing things the way that they were doing it, it was going to lead to consequences that I did not want. So every action I took in response to the way I was being treated was a well thought out, orchestrated action. All of the actions, I was thinking about it. I was thinking, what is this going to say? What is this going to do? How is this going to impact me? How is this going to impact my business, my company, my reputation? But more importantly, I was thinking, how is this going to impact their ability to treat me and the people of color that come after me? And I responded from that perspective the whole time. It was not easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I ever did. But because I could stay emotionally regulated and because I could utilize my emotional intelligence, I was able to do the number one thing I needed to do: be intentional. If you want to be successful, you have to move with intentionality. You have to really be like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to like strategically respond and take action and do things. And it was really, really important to me that I strategically move. Now, in time, those actions I took were very effective. These people stopped behaving the way they were behaving. They had to respond to some videos that I made and some posts that I made to kind of out them in their behavior. And they have mostly gone silent. They don't really talk to or about me, at least not publicly. And my experience in this field has been drastically different. Since those times, I've become the leader of this field. I've become the leader in this field. I have the biggest following in this field. I have the most impact. I have the most well-read books and the most popular content. But it's all because I behaved with intention instead of emotion. And that's what I want you to do. Learn to behave and respond with intention and not emotion. Over the years, many people have asked me, why do I think people come to therapy? And they expect me to see something like, drugs and alcohol or depression, anxiety, something related to a diagnosis. But these days, I think the number one reason people come to therapy is their emotional intelligence is suffering. Now, I really want to reiterate, I don't think that there's like unemotionally intelligent people. I think all of us have emotional intelligence. It's just, do we use it? Do we make decisions and do we respond and take actions from that perspective? And a lot of times, like something happens and we get dysregulated. A lot of times something happens and it shifts us from being emotional intelligent people to making decisions from a place other than our emotional intelligence, making a decisions from a place of emotionally dysregulated. And that's troubling. And not only is it troubling to us, but it's also troubling to the people around us. One of the greatest gifts you could ever give to someone is to focus on being more available to your emotional intelligence. It is one of the very, very best things that can ever happen to you. When you are being emotional, when you are being emotionally dysregulated, you are not the best version of yourself. And when you're not the best version of yourself, oftentimes the people that suffer the most are the people we love the most, are the people who are around us the most. There's some things that we should do about that. And we must do it about that. So today I want to talk to you about how being emotionally intelligent will make a difference in the people that matter the most, our loved ones. When I think about this, I often think about my father. Like you've heard me say a lot of times, my dad was an angry, abusive man. But all of that came into perspective. I remember being in college, and I was kind of late in college, maybe like a junior, let's say. So my college journey, I lived on campus, and then the last year or so, I lived with my mom. I didn't want to live in a dorm, and I didn't want to live off campus because it was too expensive. So my amazing mother let me move back in with her. So that year plus, I was living with my mom. And one day I came home from work, came home from college, and for whatever reason, to this day, I don't know why, my mother pulled me aside and said, "Can I tell you something about your father?" And then she told me something that I did not know about my father at that time. And I'm in my 20s, and I did not know this about my father. And it made his treatment of me and my brothers and his wife make total sense. What my mother explained to me was something that he went through in his teenage years that I didn't know, that I think impacted his ability to be emotionally intelligent. My dad, he wasn't an alcoholic. He wasn't a drug addict. He was just like massively emotionally reactive. And as a result of that, we lived in that house on pins and needles. We constantly were waiting for the other shoe to drop. We knew at any moment some small thing could turn into a big, massive thing, and the house would be unsafe. But now here I'm in my 20s and my mother's telling me this thing about my dad and his life and something that happened to him when he was in his late teens, and I'm not going to share it here. It's my dad's story, and it's his to share it if he ever decides to share it publicly. Not that my dad's a public figure or anything, but it's just not my place to say. But I learned this thing, and I was like, holy cow. That explains why we all went through what we went through. That explains why my father had control issues, abandonment issues. That explains why my father was so massively emotionally reactive. He literally could not control his reactions to things. Now, I think back to, like, if someone had helped my dad to deal with and heal from this thing that happened to him in his late teens, my life would have been completely different. The life of my mother would have been completely different. The life of my two brothers would have been completely different. Like, we would have been in a house filled with safety, warmth, and love. But instead, we were in a house full of fear. So if you don't want your loved ones walking on eggshells and being just terrified of you and being around you, deal with the things that cause you to be dysregulated. It'll make a massive difference in their lives. As I've said multiple times this week, everybody has emotional intelligence. It's not something that some people have and some people don't. The real issue is how many people activate it, or how many people make decisions from their intelligent place. This is very similar to overall intelligence. Like, we all have intelligence. It's just, how are you using it? I've told this story before when I've been teaching, like on the road, and teach people how to do therapy. But one of the best business minds I ever met was a teenager when I worked at a halfway house. And he had become one of the biggest drug dealers in Waco, Texas by the age of 13. And as I got to know that kid, I asked him, and I got to know him at 18, 19. I asked him, how did he do it? And listening to him explain how he built a drug empire before he was able to drive was amazing to me. And I thought to myself, like, if this kid had applied himself to selling books, homes, CDs, but anything really, he would have been a wild, massive success. But he applied his genius to selling drugs. Now, I use this as an example to say, like, everybody has intelligence. It's just, how are we using it? So today, on this final day of talking about emotional intelligence, I'm going to share with you how you can tell when you're around someone who isn't really coming from that place. And there's one skill, one thing, one habit, one little thing that when you see someone doing this, you know that they have activated their emotional intelligence and have a tendency to behave from that place. And when they're not doing it, you know they have not. And that one thing is self-awareness. When people are self-aware, they have a tendency to be able to do things that require emotional intelligence, compassion, the ability to see things from other perspectives. Like, these are parts of being emotionally intelligent. These are parts of the things that make people just good emotionally. So I have a mutual friend, and me and that mutual friend were talking about the friend that we share. So hope we follow that. And this person is very emotionally reactive and very not self-aware. They can't tell when they're around people and they're being too reactionary. They can't tell when they're around people and they're drinking too much. And this person has made several mistakes that simply being self-aware and being knowledgeable about the way you impact people would help them avoid. But when you are not using your emotional intelligence, you don't notice those things. You don't have the ability to see what's going on around you. And that's a trigger. That's an alarm. That's a red flag. I was driving in Boston this past week, and this car was trying to cut me off. I didn't see them, so I just keep driving. What I notice is somebody honking at me. And they're honking at me because I'm in their way of them doing some illegal thing. And I sat and thought to myself, like, that's fine if you want to come over into this lane. Totally fine. Like, I mean, what does that mean? But to think that you are entitled to the space that I am occupying when it's actually illegal for you to do so, so much so that you're like honking at me and like gesturing aggressively towards me. I mean, it's craziness. But that's the thing. It's like, you have to be very, very aware of yourself, your actions, the way you impact people, how you are doing things and they make a difference in other people's lives. We're all human beings, man. And as a result, we all have urges. You know, I drive and get frustrated, but then I'm aware like that person might be on their way home to something emergent that's going on in their life, or that person might have an issue. That person might not be rushing just because they're a big jerk. You have to have the ability to think of those things. And when you're emotionally intelligent, you can do that. You're self-aware and you are cognizant of what's going around you. And when you're emotionally unavailable to your intelligence, you aren't. That is the difference. So if you want to increase your emotional intelligence, you have to increase your self-awareness. Thanks for being here. If you wouldn't mind doing me a super huge favor, I would love it if you would share this podcast with at least one person in your life that you think could benefit from hearing this message today. And also don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you listen to your podcast. And also follow me on all of the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can search for my name, Elliott Connie, or at Elliott Speaks. That's my handle across all platforms. Can't wait to see you tomorrow.